The morning sunlight spilled gently across Jake's manicured lawn, casting long shadows over the neat rows of azaleas and freshly mown grass. At first glance, Cedarwood Estates looked like any other peaceful suburban neighborhood, where families waved politely, kids played on sidewalks, and life hummed quietly along. But behind the white picket fences and picture-perfect porches, tension simmered beneath the surface. Jake had always been proud of his home. Every flower bed was meticulously tended, every blade of grass just the right height. His pride wasn't just about appearances. It was his sanctuary from the world. But this morning, something was wrong. He stepped outside with a steaming cup of coffee and immediately spotted the problem. A dark, muddy patch stretched ominously across the corner of his front yard. It looked like a small river had recently carved through the soil. Jake's heart sank. That patch marked the spot where his underground water pipe ran, and if the muddy soil was any indication, it had burst or, worse, been deliberately cut. Kneeling, Jake dug carefully around the wet earth. The pipe was sliced clean through, water pooling inside the gash like a tiny, desperate lake. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a random accident. The clean cut looked too precise. But who would want to sabotage Jake's water supply? For weeks now, tension had been mounting between Jake and one neighbor in particular, Karen Mitchell. Karen, with her sharp eyes and sharper tongue, had never gotten along with Jake. Small disagreements over property lines and noisy late-night gatherings had escalated into a cold war of glaring looks and thinly veiled insults. Jake had tried to ignore her, but her hostility was like a dark cloud hanging over the neighborhood. His gaze flicked toward Karen's house across the street. The curtains were drawn tight, but he could almost feel her eyes burning through the glass, watching him. Jake stood, wiping the dirt from his hands. He couldn't just let this slide. As he turned to head inside, something caught his attention. A trail of muddy footprints, fresh and unsteady, leading away from the cut pipe and disappearing into the bushes lining the fence between his yard and Karen's. His pulse quickened. Was this the break he needed? He followed the footprints cautiously, heart hammering in his chest. The muddy trail ended abruptly near Karen's garden shed. The door was slightly ajar. Jake's fingers tightened around the edge of the shed door as he pulled it open. Inside, gardening tools hung neatly on hooks. But one tool stood out, a freshly sharpened pruning knife, the blade glinting cold in the sunlight, with tiny flecks of mud on its edge. A chill ran down Jake's spine. He snapped a quick photo with his phone, his mind racing. Was this enough evidence? Could he prove Karen had done this? Or was it a setup, someone trying to stir trouble? Before he could think further, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number popped up. Stop digging where you don't belong. This neighborhood has eyes. Jake's breath caught. The message wasn't signed, but it was clear. Someone was watching, and they wanted him to back off. A knot tightened in his stomach. What had started as a small, annoying feud was about to spiral far beyond anything Jake had imagined. He pocketed his phone and looked back toward Karen's house, where the curtains suddenly twitched. Someone was definitely watching. As Jake walked back toward his home, one thought burned through his mind. This wasn't just about a broken pipe anymore. This was war. Jake's mind raced as he stepped inside his house, the unknown message still glowing on his phone screen. The words echoed ominously in his head. Stop digging where you don't belong. Who could have sent that? And more importantly, why? He paced the length of his living room, glancing out the window toward Karen's house. The blinds were twitching again. Someone was definitely watching, maybe even waiting. But who? And what did they want? Determined to get answers, Jake decided the time had come to confront Karen directly. Maybe face-to-face talk would clear the air, or at least force the truth out. Grabbing his phone and the photo of the muddy knife from earlier, he stepped outside and crossed the street toward Karen's front door. His heart pounded in his chest, equal parts nervousness and resolve. He rang the doorbell. There was a pause, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, approached the door. When it swung open, Jake found himself staring into Karen's icy blue eyes. "Jake," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "What are you doing here?" He didn't beat around the bush. "Karen, my water pipe was cut. I found these footprints, leading to your shed, and this knife with mud on it. You're the only one who's had trouble with me lately. Did you do this?" Karen's face hardened instantly, her lips curled into a sneer. "How dare you accuse me? I didn't touch your pipe, and I don't know who sent you that ridiculous message." Jake saw the storm brewing behind her eyes. She wasn't just angry, she was furious. "I'm only asking for the truth," Jake said evenly. "Someone sabotaged my water. It's not just inconvenient, it could damage the whole system." Karen crossed her arms. "Maybe you should check your own backyard before blaming neighbors. You've been stirring things up with the HOA. Maybe this is karma." Jake felt his patience fray. "Karma? I just want this fixed. And if you know something, now's the ye. Time to talk." Karen took a step closer, lowering her voice to a dangerous whisper. "You don't know what you're getting into, Jake. This neighborhood has rules, and you're about to learn what happens when you break them." Before Jake could respond, a sudden shout came from down the street. Both of them turned to see Mrs. Garcia, another neighbor, waving frantically. "Jake! Karen! There's water leaking on Maple Drive! It's flooding the street!" Jake's mind clicked instantly. A water leak that big? Could it be connected? Karen rolled her eyes but didn't move. Typical. You're the one who's going to cause trouble for everyone. Jake ignored her and rushed toward the scene. His phone buzzed again. A new text from the same unknown number. "Leave it alone or everyone pays." His blood ran cold. At the flooded street, Jake saw neighbors gathering, phones in hand, all confused and frustrated. Water gushed out of a manhole cover, spilling over sidewalks and soaking parked cars. The smell of wet asphalt and damp earth filled the air. Jake crouched to inspect the flow. This wasn't just an accident. Someone had tampered with the main water valve, and if it wasn't fixed soon, the damage could spread. The crowd murmured anxiously. Karen appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't do this, did you?" Jake asked, voice low. Karen looked away, biting her lip. "No, but I don't trust anyone right now." Jake's phone buzzed again, a third message. "Last warning." Jake knew one thing for sure. This sabotage was bigger than just a broken pipe in his yard. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and he was caught right in the middle. As the water continued to gush, Jake made a decision. He had to find out who was behind this, and fast. But little did he know, Karen was already planning her next move. Jake returned home drenched and frustrated. The flooding on Maple Drive had been stopped temporarily by the city workers who showed up just in time, but the damage was done. Streets were still soaked, and the uneasy tension in the neighborhood had turned into whispered conversations and suspicious glances. Everyone was looking for a culprit, but no one wanted to admit the problem ran deeper than a simple accident. Jake sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. The messages kept coming, each one more ominous than the last. Last warning. Stop digging where you don't belong. Leave it alone, or everyone pays. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should he report these messages to the police? Would that help, or only make things worse? He decided to take the first logical step and bring the matter to the HOA board. After all, this was their neighborhood, their rules, and surely they would want to get to the bottom of this, before it escalated further. The next evening, Jake attended the monthly HOA meeting. The community center was packed. Neighbors whispered anxiously as he walked in, their eyes flickering between him and Karen, who sat rigidly across the room. Jake took a deep breath and addressed the board. There's been deliberate sabotage happening. My water pipe was cut, and now there's been a major leak on Maple Drive. I even have threatening messages on my phone. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. We need action. The room went silent. Then, Mrs. Thompson, the HOA president, cleared her throat and replied in a calm but firm voice. Jake, we understand your concerns, but the HOA's role is to maintain community standards and mediate disputes. This sounds like a police matter. Jake felt a flush of anger. But it's happening right here under our noses. The sabotage is dangerous and costly. We can't just ignore it. Mrs. Thompson shook her head. We advise caution and encourage neighbors to settle conflicts amicably. Please keep personal grievances out of HOA meetings. Jake glanced around. A few neighbors nodded politely, but others avoided his gaze. Karen smirked from across the room, her arms crossed triumphantly. Feeling dismissed, Jake left the meeting with a sinking feeling. The very people who should be helping him seemed determined to look away. Outside, Karen approached with a sly smile. See? The HOA won't get involved. Maybe you should rethink your approach, Jake. His jaw clenched. This isn't over. Karen shrugged. Good, because if you keep poking the hornet's nest, you'll be the one stung. Jake's phone buzzed again. Another message. We're watching. Stop before it's too late. He pocketed his phone and glanced around. Was the sender standing nearby, hidden among the neighbors? Was Karen involved or someone else entirely? That night, Jake couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the events, the cut pipe, the flooding, the cold dismissal by the HOA, and Karen's chilling words. He realized the situation was spiraling beyond petty neighborhood squabbles. If the HOA wouldn't act, he'd have to find another way. But who could he trust? In the darkness, Jake's thoughts settled on a risky plan. He knew the neighborhood's water system better than most. What if he could use that knowledge to force the issue, to show Karen and the HOA that he wasn't someone to be ignored? As dawn approached, Jake's resolve hardened. The quiet neighborhood was a fragile facade, and it was about to crack wide open. Jake sat alone at his kitchen table, the faint hum of the neighborhood stirring outside. The dim glow of his laptop screen illuminated a detailed map of Cedarwood Estate's water system. Every valve, every pipe, every connection. He had studied it for months after moving in, more out of curiosity than necessity, but now that knowledge felt like a secret weapon. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as a new message popped up on his phone. Last chance, back off. Jake's jaw tightened. Whoever was sending these threats wanted him to surrender. But surrender wasn't in his nature. He slid his phone aside and grabbed a flashlight. It was just after midnight, and the neighborhood was silent except for the distant bark of a dog. Jake slipped on his jacket and quietly exited his house, careful not to wake his family. His plan was reckless, maybe even dangerous. But he didn't care anymore. If Karen or whoever was behind the sabotage thought they could intimidate him, they were wrong. He crept toward the utility box near the corner of Maple Drive. This small metal box controlled the main water flow to several houses in the area, including Karen's block. Jake knelt beside the box, the cold metal biting into his skin as he opened the rusty latch. Inside, a maze of pipes and valves lay exposed. He found the valve he'd memorized, the one that controlled water to Karen's section. His heart pounded as he twisted the handle slowly. The flow of water began to slow. Minutes later, water pressure dropped on Karen's block. Faucets sputtered and stopped, sprinklers died mid-spray, and confusion quickly spread. Jake slipped back into the shadows, heart racing but face calm. He hadn't caused permanent damage, just a temporary inconvenience. A message. But then, a sudden sound shattered the stillness, a rustling behind the bushes. Jake froze. A figure stepped out from the shadows, a woman's silhouette. His breath caught. Could it be Karen? Or someone else? Jake, the voice whispered. He barely recognized it. It was Melissa, another neighbor who lived down the street. "What are you doing?" she demanded, eyes wide with shock and fear. Jake swallowed hard. "I'm sending a message. They cut my pipe. I'm done being the victim." Melissa's face darkened. "This isn't the way. You're risking everything, the whole neighborhood's water supply, for a personal grudge?" Jake clenched his fists. "They left me no choice." Melissa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You don't know who you're messing with. There are bigger forces at play here, people who don't want this feud to end." Before Jake could reply, a flashlight beam swept across the street, followed by urgent voices. "Hey, who's there?" Jake's heart slammed against his ribs. They'd been spotted. Melissa grabbed his arm. "You have to go, now!" Jake hesitated, torn between fleeing and standing his ground. "Go!" Melissa urged again. He slipped back into the shadows as 2 HOA board members and a security patrol appeared, their faces grim. "Did you see anyone?" one asked, scanning the darkness. "No," Melissa lied smoothly. Jake melted into the night, adrenaline surging. Back home, Jake locked the door behind him and collapsed onto his couch, the weight of the night crashing down. He'd made his move. But now he'd been seen. The game had changed. Who was watching? Was Karen involved? Or someone far more dangerous? And what would happen next? By morning, the neighborhood was in uproar. News spread like wildfire. The water was off in Karen's entire block. Phones buzzed with angry calls and texts. Social media pages exploded with complaints and speculation. People who'd been strangers the day before now shouted accusations at each other across fences. Jake watched from his kitchen window as frustrated neighbors gathered on the street corner, some holding buckets, others shaking their heads in disbelief. He hadn't meant to cause a neighborhood crisis. The shutoff was supposed to be a warning, a way to make Karen and the HOA take the sabotage seriously. But now everyone was paying the price. A truck from the city water department arrived, and technicians jumped out, tools in hand. They started inspecting pipes and valves, trying to trace the source of the outage. Karen appeared amid the crowd, her face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous!" she shouted, pointing an accusing finger in Jake's direction. "Whoever did this is selfish and reckless." Jake's jaw tightened. He wanted to speak up, but the growing crowd silenced him. The neighbors' stares were accusing and suspicious. "Maybe if people stopped fighting, none of this would happen," muttered Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down. "We're tearing ourselves apart." At that moment, the HOA president arrived, clipboard in hand, trying to calm the chaos. "We're doing everything we can," Mrs. Thompson said loudly. "Please be patient." Jake knew patience was wearing thin. Later, as the sun climbed high, the water technicians found something alarming. Multiple sabotaged valves, not just the one Jake had turned off. The implication was clear. Someone was intentionally damaging the water system on a broader scale. Jake's heart sank. Had he unwittingly triggered a more dangerous game? As evening approached, Jake's phone buzzed again. This time a photo, a close-up of a freshly cut pipe right outside his own house. The message read, "Next time it won't be just water." Fear prickled down Jake's spine. He wasn't just fighting a neighbor anymore. He was caught in a war, one with stakes far higher than he'd imagined. And the question that haunted him was simple but chilling. How far would they go? The next morning, Cedarwood Estates was a powder keg ready to explode. Word about the widespread water sabotage had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Fear and suspicion seeped into every conversation. Neighbors who once smiled politely now avoided eye contact, wary of who might be responsible for the mounting chaos. At the community center, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with nervous energy as residents packed in, some with arms crossed, others clutching phones and printouts of the damage. Mrs. Thompson, the HOA president, tapped the microphone nervously. "We understand the severity of the situation. We want to assure you we're investigating the sabotage thoroughly, but we need calm and cooperation." Her words were met with murmurs and uneasy glances. Jake sat near the back, watching the room. Karen sat opposite him, arms folded, eyes narrowed like a hawk. Suddenly, Karen stood and pointed directly at Jake. "This is his doing!" He cut off. "The water to our block last week, and now this sabotage is spreading. He's trying to stir up trouble for everyone." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. Jake rose to respond, voice steady but firm. "I admit to turning off the water to Karen's block, but only to send a warning after my pipe was cut. But I'm not responsible for the other sabotage. Someone else is trying to pit us against each other." Karen's glare was icy. "That's convenient. How do we know you're telling the truth?" Tensions escalated quickly. Neighbors took sides, arguments flared, and the atmosphere turned hostile. Mrs. Thompson raised her hands. "Enough. Accusations won't solve anything." Just then, a young woman stepped forward. It was Melissa, the neighbor who'd confronted Jake weeks before. "I've been looking into this," she said quietly. "I found something suspicious. Near the utility boxes on Cedar Lane. Signs that someone has been tampering repeatedly. And it's not Jake or Karen." A hush fell over the room. Melissa continued, "We need to work together and watch for anyone acting strangely. This sabotage is bigger than just two neighbors fighting." Jake felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this mess, but Karen wasn't ready to back down. Or maybe it's someone who wants to keep us divided. The room erupted into more shouting. Jake's phone buzzed. A new message. "The truth is closer than you think. Trust no one." He glanced around the room, suddenly aware that someone was watching him from the back, someone who quickly looked away. The blame game had only just begun, and Jake knew the worst was still ahead. Days passed, but the tension in Cedarwood Estates only thickened. The sabotage was far from over, and the neighborhood was fracturing under the weight of fear and suspicion. Jake felt like he was living in a nightmare. Every glance from a neighbor seemed loaded with accusation. Karen's cold smirk was a constant reminder that she was watching, waiting for him to slip. Determined to find the truth, Jake teamed up with Melissa. Together they began investigating the utility boxes, reviewing surveillance footage from a few neighbors' doorbell cameras, and tracing the pattern of the damage. One evening, as Jake pored over the grainy footage, a chilling figure appeared. A shadowy person lurking near the utility boxes, wearing a hoodie pulled low to obscure their face. The timestamp was from just before the most recent sabotage. Melissa squinted at the screen. "That's not Jake or Karen." Jake nodded grimly. "But who?" The footage was inconclusive, but it gave them a lead. Late that night, Jake and Melissa decided to stake out the neighborhood's water system, hoping to catch the culprit in the act. They hid behind bushes near a main valve when a figure slipped through the shadows. Jake's heart thundered as he recognized the person. Not Karen, but someone else entirely. The HOA's maintenance man, Greg. Greg moved quickly, cutting pipes and tampering with valves. His movements were precise, almost practiced. Jake stepped forward, voice low but firm. "Greg, what the hell are you doing?" Greg froze, then turned slowly. "You don't understand. This isn't personal. It's about control." Melissa frowned. "Control? What do you mean?" Greg's eyes darted nervously. "The HOA board's been covering up problems for years. Budget mismanagement, hidden fees. They need chaos to distract everyone, and they want to force certain people out." Jake's blood ran cold. The sabotage was part of a bigger conspiracy, a plan to manipulate and divide the neighborhood for financial gain. "But why sabotage your own neighbors?" Jake asked. Greg sighed. Because when you control the water, you control the neighborhood. People will be desperate, vulnerable. That's when the board steps in with solutions, at a price. Melissa shook her head. We have to expose this. Greg looked around nervously. If you do, they'll come after you too. It's not safe. Jake clenched his fists. We can't let them win. Suddenly, a light flashed behind them. Footsteps approached fast. Freeze! A voice barked. It was Karen. Or rather, someone who looked like her. But as the figure stepped closer, Jake's heart dropped. It wasn't Karen at all. It was Mrs. Thompson, the HOA president, her face cold and unreadable. So, Mrs. Thompson said, voice dripping with menace. We meet at last. Jake's heart pounded as Mrs. Thompson's cold gaze locked on to him and Melissa. The night air seemed to thicken around them, charged with tension. You've been quite the little detectives, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice smooth but venomous. But you don't know the whole story. Jake swallowed hard. Why sabotage? The water system? Why threaten the neighborhood? Mrs. Thompson smiled thinly. Control, power, money, the usual. The HOA's budget has been a mess for years. The board decided drastic measures were necessary to reset the community and sell off some properties to developers. Creating chaos was part of the plan. Melissa's eyes widened. So you're behind all this? Mrs. Thompson shrugged. Let's just say I'm involved. Greg here was just a pawn doing the dirty work. Greg lowered his head, guilt and fear evident. I didn't want this. They threatened me and my family. Jake felt a surge of anger. You put everyone at risk, innocent people. Sometimes, Mrs. Thompson said sharply, the greater. Good requires sacrifice. You and Karen were just obstacles in our way. Suddenly, headlights flooded the street. Police cars screeched to a halt. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. Step away from the valves, one commanded. Mrs. Thompson's face flickered with shock. How did you... Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced down. A tipster had called the police anonymously, sending evidence collected by Jake and Melissa. HOA's dirty secrets were about to be exposed. Mrs. Thompson and Greg were handcuffed and led away amid stunned whispers from the gathering neighbors. Karen appeared from the shadows, watching quietly. Jake approached her cautiously. So you weren't behind this after all? Karen's eyes softened slightly. No. I was scared and angry, but I never wanted this chaos. Jake nodded. Neither did I. As the neighborhood began to calm, water service was restored block by block. Repairs started in earnest and a new sense of cautious hope settled over Cedarwood Estates. In the following weeks, the HOA was restructured with new leadership committed to transparency and fairness. Jake and Melissa became unexpected community leaders, helping neighbors heal and rebuild trust. One evening, Jake walked home from a neighborhood barbecue, he passed Karen's house. She waved, a small smile breaking through the tension that had long divided them. Jake smiled back. The battle for Cedarwood Estates was over, but the scars reminded everyone how fragile peace can be when fear and power collide. And Jake knew one truth above all. Sometimes standing up for what's right means risking everything, even when the whole neighborhood seems to be against you.